After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the origins of grounded theory analysis, learn the basic features underlying grounded theory, identify the various steps involved in developing grounded theory, analyze the ethics involved in grounded theory, and you will be able to evaluate grounded theory in terms of its strengths and its weaknesses. Grounded theory is a method of qualitative research which emphasizes on collecting and analyzing qualitative data by building inductive theories. A grounded theory is one which begins with gathering focused data so as to make sense of a participant's experience and simultaneously develops concepts that synthesize and explain the collected data. Origins of grounded theory. Grounded theory methods emerged from the works of Barney G. Glaser and Anselm Strauss. During the 1960s, majority of people followed the quantitative or the positivistic methodologies, which were thought based on scientific logic, objectivity and truth via separation of facts from values, but ignored a number of human problems that did not fit their design. Furthermore, it accentuated the difference between theory and research. Subsequently, Glaser and Strauss challenged the assumptions that the qualitative research was unsystematic and could not generate theories. They also questioned the arbitrary division of theory and research, consequently publishing The Discovery of Grounded Theory in 1967. This book was the first major publication detailing grounded theory. It described the guidelines for conducting a qualitative research using grounded theory and depicted that grounded theory contains both positivistic as well as interpretive elements. The characteristic features of grounded theory are: the basic features of grounded theory could be systematic, that means the process of developing grounded theory involves the systematic and careful application of general principles and methods. The guidelines. It follows a system of guidelines which directs data collection, analysis and the development of theory. Inductive processes. In the development of grounded theory, the emphasis is on inductive processes as opposed to the conventional deductive approach, where hypotheses are formulated on the basis of an existing theory and is subjected to empirical testing. It is a continuous process. The development of grounded theory is a continuous process which is contrary to the hypothesis testing. The process cannot be divided into discrete stages as the theory building starts early, at the stage of data collection and proceeds till the stage of writing up. The essential features of grounded theory, as emphasized by Glaser and Strauss in 1967, are generating focused data such that the researcher is into close familiarity with the participants and the data continuously. Simultaneous involvement in data collection and analysis phases of research. Developing analytic codes and categories from the data, not from preconceived hypotheses. Constructing middle range theories to explain behavior and processes. Memo writing, that is, analytic notes to explicate and fill out categories. Making comparisons between data and data, data and concept, concept and data. Theoretical sampling, that is, sampling for theory construction to check and to refine conceptual categories, not for representativeness of a given population. Delaying the literature review until after forming the analysis. The steps to perform the grounded theory are as follows. Step 1. Developing a research hypothesis or a question. Any researcher commences the research process with the development of a research question. This question can originate from a number of sources. First, being the researcher's curiosity. It is likely that a researcher may find himself or herself intrigued by any incident, ordinary or unique, or event and wish to explore it. Personal concern. Another source of motivation can be if any issue or situation is close to an individual's personal beliefs, circumstances, life episodes, etc. Incomplete models of research. When a researcher feels that the theoretical models proposed in any field of research or the explanations offered are inadequate or incomplete and consist of loopholes, he or she can explore that area of research. Emergence of a new phenomena. The discovery of a new phenomenon or an element can enthuse interest in many researchers, thereby directing a research in that domain. Hence, identifying and shaping a research problem in grounded theory is based on the principle of adopting an issue, which can be studied in theory development, perspective, and expands knowledge. Furthermore, in grounded theory, literature review is seen as a part of the development of research rather than just an initial step. This helps in elaborating and modifying the incoming data. Step 2. Sampling. In grounded theory, sampling is usually determined on the basis of theories one builds up to interpret data over the period of the grounded theory analysis. This is called theoretical sampling. Theoretical sampling means seeking pertinent data to develop the emerging theory. The main purpose of theoretical sampling is to elaborate and refine the categories constituting such theory. The researcher conducts theoretical sampling to develop the properties of the categories until no new properties emerge. Theoretical sampling is different from random sampling since in theoretical sampling one's purpose is to develop a theory rather than satisfy the criterion of equal representation so as to make the results more generalizable. Furthermore, the degree to which each participant contributes towards developing an understanding of the social phenomena is also variable and thus no possibility of equal representation. Hence, it tries to capture the underlying experiences of the respondents. Grounded theory primarily uses three types of sampling techniques. What are they? Convenience sampling. This forms the initial stage of sampling. During the beginning, one gains an entry into the field and tries to establish a familiarity with one's surroundings. At this point, one employs convenience sampling so as to get in touch with the possible cases and acquire first insights. Purposeful sampling. By this phase, the researcher is better acquainted with these surroundings and therefore becomes more goal-directed. He or she tries to identify more specific cases as well as incorporate variations in the material or data. During these phases, the researcher practices sensitizing concepts. These concepts give the researcher a general sense of references and guidance in approaching empirical instances, suggest directions along which to look, and rest on a general sense of what is relevant. Bloomer, 1970. These basically act as starting point of identifying the relevant cases. Once one has identified a specific problem that lacks empirical analysis and theoretical explanation, he or she can explore the context in which the problem is to be studied. Theoretical sampling. This forms a step in the refinement of the preliminary theory instead of a starting point in the data collection. This is because it is exercised only when the research process has progressed to a stage at which a set of explanatory categories have been formulated to understand the incidents or issues in the data. Theoretical sampling is subsequently employed to elaborate the meaning of the categories, discover the differences between them, and define gaps between categories. Henceforth, it requires being selective about which data one seeks and the person one seeks it from. That is, it focuses on certain experiences or issues through observing or talking with the individuals and not on an individual's per se. As a result, theoretical sampling proves effective in refining key categories by focusing further data collection in that direction, explicitly defining and identifying their properties and parameters and making the consequent memo writing precise, analytic and incisive by moving to and fro between targeted data collection and the analytic memo writing. Sampling usually in qualitative research consists of small sample size, and therefore in the grounded theory as well, sampling is continued till one reaches the point of theoretical saturation. This is the point at which any new cases lack the ability to be able to provide any sort of additional information. Step 3 is the process of data collection. In the grounded theory, the researcher typically begins with the textual material referred to as the data. The data can in the form of documents, materials from the newspapers, magazines or internet, or can be in the form of transcripts. The data can be gathered by using multiple forms of qualitative research methods like the interviews, observation, focus group discussions and the like, so as to attain a more comprehensive picture. Also, it requires a repeated field contact, that is, coming back to the fields and the participants so as to collect more data. Furthermore, data gathering, analysis and construction proceeds concurrently and consequently. The repeated field contacts are essential for adapting data collection to the needs and the questions resulting from the analysis of data so far. Step number 4, memo writing. Memo writing plays a central role in the process of grounded theory. It primarily involves notes taking and is intended to aid in the discovery and development of the theory. Richardson in 1994 has defined 4 categories for documentation and reflection over the entire process. Observation notes. They deal with covering all perceptions in the field. Methodological notes. These are notes about how methods are applied and how to frame that situation. Theoretical notes, in the sense of what grounded researchers describe as memos. Personal notes consist of diary, journal of the researcher. Memo writing functions to make the analysis more transparent and therefore is most beneficial if it is allowed throughout the process. It includes impressions, descriptions of the settings, quotes from the respondent in the interview and intriguing events in relation to field interviews, etc. Step 5 is that of coding. Coding is the process of defining what the data is about. It is a pivotal link between collecting data and developing an emergent theory. Coding can be of various types, but the important ones here are open coding. It is a process in which the data is subjected to a line-by-line analysis, that is, scrutiny of each line and thereafter giving each line a descriptive code. These codes are aimed at a higher level of abstraction so that a theory emanates. This ensures that by the end of this, the researcher has a short, specific word for each line and can develop a better insight of the familiar text and broadens one's ideas. It also ensures that the researcher does not get too immersed in the views of the respondents, but rather takes an analytical stance and simultaneously keeps in close touch with the data. Axial coding. It was introduced by Strauss and Corbin in 1998. It deals with relating the codings together by using both inductive and deductive reasoning. It usually acts as the second reworking of the developing theory by focusing on identifying commonalities and differences of the categories and concepts formulated, organizing the initial codes, integration, etc. Selective coding. In this process, the researcher identifies a category that forms the core of the analysis and, like a center, relates every other category to itself. Hence, primarily involves developing a major theme or a storyline around which all other aspects of the analysis are integrated. Step 6. Category development. After obtaining line-by-line codings from the data, researchers organize them into categories which incorporate several of these codings. Thus, a conceptual synthesis develops. The process of developing categories from several similar codings is important for the development of grounded theory. This is because codings are the smallest formal unit which provides a better perspective about the data when they are categorized. In grounded theory, as in any other form of qualitative research, data is considered in its entirety. In other words, All aspects of the data are considered for building categories for analysis, not just data based on correlations or other numerical aspects as in quantitative research. The categories developed are then understood properly by the researchers who perform the task of labeling, which ensures clarity regarding the theme of the category. Also, the categories are constantly compared with the other categories in order to check that they do not overlap. Category development actually includes two important principles: constant comparison and category saturation. Constant comparison involves checking and critically assessing any aspect of the analysis against other aspects to check whether the elements in the codings fit well with one another. This is therefore also known to employ the constant comparative methods, as it emphasizes comparing one respondent's beliefs, stance and actions with another and demarcating into respective categories, integrating categories by establishing relationships, delimiting the range and scope of theory and writing theory. Category saturation is a point when the analysis cannot proceed further. At this point, further comparisons do not provide further refinements to the theory. Also, a decision is to be taken at this stage about terminating the data collection if it does not generate anything important, which is different from what is already known. Additionally, memo writing is also used as an intermediate step between defining categories and the first draft of completed analysis. Conclusively, it helps distinguish between major and minor categories and thus directs the shape and the form of emergent analysis. Step 7. Theoretical sampling used to test categories relationships. At this stage of the analysis, the principles of theoretical sampling are utilized again to generate new data for testing the adequacy of the categories which have been developed during analysis. Data is collected to procure evidence which may be in line with the existing theory or may be contrary to the existing concepts and demand revision of the theory. Theoretical coding can be used to identify relationships among substantive codes to give a structure to the theory and to form core categories. Step 8. Test hypothesis to develop substantive theory. Grounded theory, which is based on the relationships between different categories, can be used to develop and test hypotheses about other aspects of the topic of research. Not only does this make the theory more interesting, it also helps reveal certain unknown concepts and makes the theory more substantive. Step 9. Collect data and perform analysis in other settings. After the generation of grounded theory in a particular research setting, it can be extended to other research settings, depending on the nature of the theory. Data is collected and analyzed in other settings to provide new insights to the particular phenomenon. The more generalizable the theory, the closer it is to being a formal theory. For example, a researcher wishes to study the impact of stress in the lives of corporate officials. The idea for exploring this problem may emerge out of curiosity or personal concern. The researcher decides to use grounded theory since the research question is not rigid, but is based on the researcher's interest and can be guided into various domains. The researcher will begin to collect as much preliminary information as possible through literature review to get familiarized with the social environment. Then, he or she will try to gain entry in the field, that is, the corporate companies, and establish himself or herself as a confidant to obtain relevant information from the participants. The researcher may now begin data collection by interviewing the research participants and asking basic questions relating to their personal and professional lives first. These may include questions like, what is your routine? How many hours do you devote to work? How do you balance your personal and professional lives, etc. Gradually, the researcher may become more curious and intrigued by the responses of the participants and starts becoming goal detected. He or she begins to club these responses into various categories like one's self-concept in relation to work, duration of being in the profession, experiences of distress, etc. The data can also be collected by participant observation or focus group discussions between employees at various ranks. The researcher may also refer to journals, newspapers, articles, etc. Now the researcher will start with memo writing. He or she will make personal notes, note of the situational factors and non-verbal cues of the participants. Subsequently, the researcher will categorize the responses into different groups by employing various types of codings. Initially, one implements open coding and puts all the ideas that one can think of inductively. Then one gradually moves towards focused coding. The researcher indulges in theoretical sampling and selects the most dramatic cases and investigates further by asking focused questions that helps refine the existing categories: poor self-image, indulgence in work to avoid responsibility. A person showing symptoms of distress may be selected in the sample and subjected to such analysis. After refining the categories, the researcher will consider the data in its entirety and will begin the process of constant comparison between the data obtained and the theory developed so far. This process will continue until a saturation point is reached and no new information is obtained. Through this rigorous research, one can understand patterns of distress and consequences of exclusion from the team projects from the perspective of the research participants. This study can be extended to develop preventive strategies for stress in corporate life. However, no causal links can be established in the obtained data. When to use the grounded theory? Grounded theory is a method of developing theory such that it is closely resembling the data on which it is based. It directs the process of data collection while performing analysis. This approach of combining data collection and analysis in an interactive manner is quite demanding and requires proper training and expertise of the researcher. It is usually attempted by researchers seeking intellectual stimulation and challenge. According to Potter, 1998, grounded theory is best suited to issues involving the common perceptions of the research participants. It presents the ways by which people express their understanding and experience in the world. Thus, grounded theory is often used to test research questions pertaining to medical illness and interpersonal relationships. These topics are aligned with the everyday perspective of the research participants. Ethics in grounded theory. According to the explanations or the expectations of a clear ethical research design, any researcher undertaking grounded theory analysis should specify the method employed and the number and the kind of research participants. However, grounded theory is a method in which most of these questions are addressed only during data collection and analysis. The researcher should clearly define the research question and the aim of the research and try to specify how many participants will be used from which social groups or backgrounds. Also, the ethical consideration of obtaining informed consent from the research participants and the protection of sensitive information by ensuring their anonymity should be kept in mind. Another ethical issue is beneficence, which includes specifying the new insights which are expected to emerge from the research. This justifies the reason to approach a participant and asking for their time and personal experiences. Evaluation of the grounded theory. Let us look at some of the advantages. Grounded theory has provided an alternative to the traditional hypothesis testing approach to research, as it is based on systematic research procedures. It has helped to remove the distinction between research and theory by suggesting that data collection and analysis can proceed simultaneously while developing the theory. Grounded theory has provided a means to validate the theory against empirical data. It emphasizes effective theory development. It breaks the misconception that qualitative research can only be used in exploratory studies. The theory generated using grounded theory analysis is closely related to the perception and the experiences of the research participants. Thus, it is readily understood by the people and is useful to policymakers and practitioners who plan to understand their viewpoint. Grounded theory does not specify any particular types of data. It works well with diaries, biographies, newspaper articles, interviews, focus groups, etc. Some disadvantages. The scope of data collection is endless, and any material, textual or spoken, can be subjected to grounded theory analysis. Since theory development occurs after the beginning of data collection, there is often a lack of clarity regarding the subject matter of grounded theory. There is a possibility for the theory to emerge from any research area. Some of the procedures involved in grounded theory are rather vague and difficult to understand. The researcher is involved in a lot of mental work while simultaneously carrying out practical steps for the development of the theory. This can give rise to confusion and uncertainty. The development of grounded theory requires a constant referral between the data and the analysis. There are several possible ways of doing this comparison. Thus, there is a possibility of confusing other methods of data comparison with that of the grounded theory. Grounded theory as a method is time consuming, exacting and meticulous. It requires the close familiarity with the data, which requires time and a lot of effort. The theory generated can be applied to new sets of data, but it is usually difficult to make causal prediction. To summarize, grounded theory is a qualitative analysis technique in which data gathering, analysis and construction of theory proceeds simultaneously. Grounded theory employs systematic procedures to make comparison between data and the theory or the concept. Grounded theory uses theoretical sampling, which is based on the categories developed during the analysis. The researcher refers to various sources of information to obtain data and gradually focuses on the specific aspects of the general research question.